The day I decided to file for divorce felt heavier than any winter morning I had ever endured. Outside, the streets of Savannah were bathed in a pale amber light, the kind that made everything look as if it were slightly out of focus, almost dreamlike. Inside our house, the silence was suffocating, filled only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the antique clock my grandmother had left me. I stared at the framed photograph of my wedding day, Simon and I smiling, holding hands, pretending the world was ours. Now it felt like a lie carved into glass. Simon, my husband for 8 years, had become a stranger, someone whose laughter had a hollow echo, whose promises had faded like old paint. I had endured his dismissive comments, his sudden coldness, his relentless expectation that I would always pick up the pieces of our life, financially and emotionally. But the final straw had come last week when I discovered that while pretending to be stressed at work, he had been siphoning money from our joint accounts and planning an elaborate weekend getaway for himself and someone else. Someone else I didn't want to name aloud. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, I felt something solidifying inside me, a resolve I had never known I possessed. Simon thought he could live off me, that our divorce would leave me fearful of confrontation, that my inheritance and savings would become his playground. He was wrong. I had spent hours consulting with Ava Harrow, my lawyer, a woman of impeccable patience and razor-sharp intellect, who had guided me through the preliminary paperwork and whispered strategies for safeguarding my assets. I trusted her. More importantly, I trusted myself. The plan was simple. I would act calm, appear cooperative, and while Simon tried to charm and intimidate me, I would quietly assemble the pieces of a strategy that would leave him powerless. I remembered Ava's words as if they had been carved into my mind. He may think he knows you, Neris, but he doesn't. Never underestimate the power of preparation and foresight. That phrase echoed in my thoughts as I got up to prepare for the day. I needed to appear composed when I confronted him later, though my stomach twisted into knots at the thought. He had no idea I had already spoken to my father's accountant, secured copies of our property deeds, and prepared a full inventory of joint and separate assets. He believed he had the upper hand because I had always been the nurturing, accommodating partner, the one who smoothed over his temper, who handled the bills, who reminded him about appointments and birthdays. But now, the tables were turning. I pulled on my tailored gray suit, the one that made my shoulders appear broader and my posture firm. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman both exhausted and resolute, someone who had endured storms and was finally learning to navigate by her own compass. The front door clicked behind me as I left the house, the early morning air crisp against my face, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. Savannah had always been picturesque, but today it seemed to stand witness to the change in my life. I drove past the oak-lined streets, the Spanish moss swaying like silent sentinels, feeling an odd mix of nostalgia and liberation. Arriving at Ava's office, I found her reviewing files on her large mahogany desk, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "Good morning," I said, trying to inject lightness into my voice. She looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Good morning, Neris. Are you ready?" "Ready." The word resonated like a drumbeat in my chest. "Yes, more than ever." Ava nodded approvingly. "Remember, he'll try to manipulate. Expect it. Do not show him an ounce of hesitation." The meeting with Simon was scheduled in a neutral conference room downtown. Ava and I arrived first, and the room seemed smaller than I remembered. A long oval table, 4 chairs, a muted painting on the wall. When Simon and his lawyer arrived, he wore a tailored black suit, his hair slicked back as if preparing for battle. He greeted me with a casual smile that did not reach his eyes. "Neris," he said, voice smooth, practiced. "I thought we'd meet to discuss things amicably." Amicably. That word made my stomach churn. I knew what was coming. A thinly veiled attempt to guilt, to charm, to intimidate. "Good morning, Simon," I replied evenly, sliding into my chair. Ava took a seat next to me, her presence grounding. Simon's lawyer, a young man with an eager, sharp expression, laid out his files, papers arranged meticulously, an arsenal of financial claims, emotional appeals, and legal maneuvers meant to destabilize me. Simon leaned back, crossing his arms, eyes fixed on me with an unsettling mixture of affection and expectation. He began to speak, praising my supposed generosity, my hard work, subtly weaving his belief that he deserved my support even post-divorce. I listened, nodding faintly, all the while Ava's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent signal to stay composed. I had anticipated every argument, every manipulation. He was counting on my emotional response. Instead, I stayed silent, letting his words hang in the air. When he paused, I spoke, voice calm but firm. "Simon, the assets are divided according to the law and the agreements we have established. Any attempts to manipulate or coerce will not alter the facts." His eyebrows shot up, a flicker of surprise, or perhaps irritation passing over his face. "Facts," he said, incredulous. "We built a life together. You can't just throw that away." "We built a life, yes, but I am not your bank, Simon. I will not subsidize your choices. The trust funds, the inheritance, the joint properties, they are protected legally and irrevocably. I have ensured that," Ava chimed in, projecting authority and calm. "Mr. Terrence, everything Miss Veyron has stated is legally verified. Attempts to claim separate property will be contested vigorously in court. We advise you to reconsider any aggressive or manipulative approach." Simon shifted in his seat, unease creeping into his posture. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that my kindness equaled weakness, that my willingness to mediate meant I lacked resolve. But here I was, prepared, informed, and unwavering. I could see the cogs turning in his mind as he tried to recalibrate. Outside, through the conference room window, the city moved on unaware, people hurrying past coffee shops, cars gliding down streets lined with autumn leaves. And in that moment, I felt a subtle thrill of liberation. I was no longer merely reacting to Simon's demands. I was orchestrating the confrontation, guiding it on my terms. I realized that revenge was not about anger or humiliation. It was about reclaiming control, asserting boundaries, and ensuring that deceit and entitlement would not succeed. Simon opened his mouth again, but I interrupted gently but firmly. "Simon, this discussion is over, unless it is to arrange the equitable division of shared properties as previously agreed. Any other claim is irrelevant." His jaw tightened, a visible tremor of frustration crossing his face. I knew this was only the beginning. He would test, he would probe, he would attempt subtler manipulations. But I was ready. I had fortified not only my assets, but my sense of self. As he leaned back, silent for a long moment, I felt a wave of calm sweep over me. Ava gave me a subtle nod. Outside, the Savannah sun climbed higher, bathing the streets in warm light, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe fully. My life was no longer dictated by fear, expectation, or manipulation. It was mine, and I was just beginning to reclaim it. The next morning, I awoke to a light drizzle pattering against the windows, the soft rhythm a strangely comforting backdrop to my thoughts. After the tense confrontation with Simon, I felt both drained and oddly exhilarated, as if a storm had passed and the sky, though gray, had cleared enough for sunlight to peek through. Savannah's streets were quieter than usual, the autumn leaves slick with rain, glistening like scattered jewels along the sidewalks. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, savoring the bitter warmth that seemed to awaken more than just my body. The day ahead demanded focus. My first stop was the office of Julian Crestwood, the financial advisor my father had recommended before his passing. Julian was meticulous, the kind of man who measured everything in numbers and probabilities, and I needed someone like that to ensure Simon could not exploit any loopholes I might have overlooked. His office was on the 5th floor of a modern building downtown, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city that made the mundane hum of office life seem somehow cinematic. Julian greeted me with a nod, his gray suit impeccable, his demeanor calm yet probing. "Miss Veyron," he said, using my maiden name, which felt fitting in this context. "I understand you're here to review asset protections post-divorce." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Yes. I want to ensure there is absolutely no way for Simon to gain access to my inheritance, savings, or personal investments. I want everything bulletproof." Julian smiled faintly, recognizing not only the seriousness, but the confidence behind my words. "I've prepared a full review," he said, gesturing to a neatly organized stack of documents. "I've looked into all current accounts, trusts, and property holdings. As we suspected, the way your father structured the trust leaves very little room for challenge. However, I have a few recommendations to further reinforce your security, including separate accounts with multi-tiered access and preemptive notifications in case of any attempted transactions. I listened carefully, taking notes, my mind organizing every detail, every precaution. Simon had underestimated me, and I intended to capitalize on that. Excellent, I said, let's do it. The next item on my agenda was a visit to the art gallery where Simon had recently attempted to sell a painting he claimed was an original piece of his. I had to understand the scope of his current activities, both to gauge his desperation and to ensure he could not manipulate others into undermining my position. The gallery, a sleek contemporary space on Bay Street, was quiet when I arrived, a receptionist typing quickly at the front desk. The gallery director, a young woman named Marielle Duval, greeted me warmly. Miss Veyron, I've heard about your situation. Simon has been a complicated presence here. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'm here to understand his current dealings. Have there been any sales or exhibitions under his name recently? Marielle hesitated slightly, then shook her head. Not since the last incident. He tried to pass off a copy as an original, and after some investigation, it became clear that it was fraudulent. We've refused further submissions. Most of the local galleries are now wary of him. A small, almost imperceptible smile crept onto my face. Justice, it seemed, was already at work, though indirectly. Thank you, Marielle, I said. It's important I know how he's positioned himself in the art world. For my own planning, of course. Outside the gallery, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under the morning sun. I walked slowly, letting the damp air fill my lungs, feeling the weight of the past months lifting incrementally with every step. Yet I knew that complete security, complete closure, would not come so easily. Simon, or Terrence, as his birth name truly was, had proven resourceful, deceitful, and relentless. I had to anticipate the unexpected. By noon, I returned home, stopping briefly at a cafe to grab a salad. I took a corner table, unpacked my notebook, and began drafting a list. Accounts to monitor, investments to diversify, potential allies to consult, and weaknesses Simon might exploit. Every line reinforced my strategy. Every crossed-off potential risk a small victory of foresight. When I returned home, I found a package waiting on the porch. No return address, only my name elegantly written in looping script. My curiosity piqued. I carried it inside, carefully slicing the tape to reveal its contents, a set of leather-bound journals, neatly stacked and tied with a satin ribbon, along with a note in familiar handwriting. For clarity, the note read. I immediately recognized the script. It was from Leora Montclair, my father's private secretary and lifelong confidant. Leora had always been a guardian of information, a meticulous chronicler of my father's directives, and someone I trusted implicitly. I opened the top journal, flipping through its pages filled with detailed accounts of Simon's financial entanglements, past lawsuits, and the many attempts he had made to manipulate business associates and friends. It was a veritable roadmap of his character and tactics. My pulse quickened as I read. He had underestimated the extent to which my father had foreseen potential threats. The foresight he had embedded in the trust, the steps taken to prevent exploitation, and now I had that knowledge, a weapon far more potent than anger or revenge could ever be. Later that afternoon, Ava called to check on my progress. "Neris, are you feeling ready for the next step?" she asked. I paused, looking out the window at the river reflecting the soft orange glow of the late afternoon sun. "Yes, I've never been more ready," I replied. Ava's tone was approving. "Good. The court hearing is next week. Simon will attempt to challenge certain divisions, but we have all necessary documentation, witnesses, and evidence. Stick to the facts. Let him flail. You stay composed." That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, reflecting on the day. My father's foresight, Julian's financial reinforcements, Marielle's confirmation about Simon's artistic failures, and Leora's journals had created a web of protection I could not have imagined a month ago. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating. For the first time, I felt that my life was fully mine again, that the next encounter with Simon would not be a battle of fear, but a demonstration of strategy, intellect, and preparation. As the sun set, casting the savannah skyline in warm hues of amber and rose, I knew that the coming week would mark a turning point. Simon might believe he could manipulate or intimidate me, but the game had changed. I would not be the pawn. I would be the player, and his world, built on assumptions of entitlement and deceit, would begin to crumble under the weight of truth and strategy. My phone buzzed, a message from Ava. Early prep tomorrow. Bring journals and all documents. Be ready. I nodded to myself, finishing the last sip of wine, and felt a rare, exhilarating sense of anticipation. This was more than a divorce. This was the beginning of my revenge. Not in anger, but in justice, in reclaiming the power Simon believed he had stolen. Outside, the night deepened, and the faint hum of the city seemed to echo my determination. I was ready to reclaim not only my assets, but my life, piece by piece, with precision, patience, and foresight. Simon's world, once secure in his illusions, was about to shift irreversibly. The next morning dawned cold and crisp, the autumn wind cutting through the streets of Savannah with a sharp edge that mirrored my own resolve. I woke early, even before the sun had begun to rise fully, and dressed in a tailored navy suit that exuded both authority and understated elegance. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman transformed, not just in appearance, but in mindset. Simon had believed he could manipulate and control, but he had never accounted for preparation, strategy, or foresight. The cafe near my apartment, the one with the corner window and the smell of fresh espresso that always reminded me of quiet mornings in my father's study, became my temporary command center. I ordered a cappuccino and found a secluded table, spreading out the journals Leora had sent, along with my notes from Julian's meeting the day before. Each page was a reminder of how much I had learned about Simon, how much he had revealed about his own weaknesses through carelessness and arrogance. I cataloged the evidence: financial discrepancies, falsified art documents, inconsistencies in his employment history, and even the subtle patterns of behavior that suggested he relied on charm rather than competence to achieve his goals. By the time my cappuccino had cooled, I had a detailed mental map of his vulnerabilities, a plan forming with crystalline clarity. Ava arrived shortly after, her presence calm but insistent. "Neris," she said, sliding into the seat opposite me, "today we finalize the strategy for court. Simone will expect intimidation and hesitation. We give him none of that. Stick to facts, documents, and witness testimony. Emotion only clouds perception." I nodded, flipping to a section in Leora's journal that outlined Simon's attempts to leverage friends and acquaintances to gain financial advantage. "We can predict his moves," I said quietly, "because he repeats patterns. He thinks he's clever, but he's predictable." Ava smiled faintly. "Exactly. And this is how we control the narrative. Every piece of evidence you present is a chess move. The more precise, the more devastating. He's counting on you making a mistake. We won't give him that." With a sense of focus, I spent the remainder of the morning assembling documents, cross-referencing bank statements with Julian's notes, and reviewing Leora's detailed accounts. The time passed almost unnoticed, and soon it was noon. I took a short walk to clear my mind, the streets bustling with people moving briskly to escape the chill. I caught myself glancing at the upscale galleries Simon might have targeted, imagining him trying to maintain a facade of professionalism while his reputation crumbled beneath him. A sense of grim satisfaction bubbled within me, tempered by the need to remain composed and detached. Returning home, I reviewed my next step: direct confrontation with Simon at the court hearing. Unlike previous meetings where he had assumed superiority, this time the dynamics would be entirely reversed. The evidence, the journals, and Julian's financial reinforcements would ensure he could not manipulate or intimidate. My phone buzzed, a message from Leora. "Remember, he thrives on fear. Don't give him even the smallest hint of it. Keep your face calm, your tone measured. He must not know you anticipate him. That is your power." I read it twice, committing every word to memory. The afternoon passed in a blur of meticulous preparation. I practiced my statements aloud, refining the cadence, ensuring every phrase carried the weight of certainty. By early evening, I felt a rare combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. Dinner was light, grilled salmon and a salad, followed by a quiet hour spent on the porch, sipping tea and letting the cool breeze wash over me. Thoughts drifted briefly to the life Simon had tried to build with me, a life predicated on control and dependency. It felt surreal now, how easily he had underestimated me, how certain he had been of my compliance. The evening call came from Ava, reminding me of tomorrow's schedule. Early arrival at the courthouse, complete documentation, and a review with witnesses prepared to testify. "Remember," she said, "precision is your ally. Simon's bluster can only carry him so far against verified evidence. I hung up and sat in silence, letting the weight of her words settle. This was not just about divorce or money. This was about reclaiming autonomy, establishing boundaries, and demonstrating that deceit and entitlement had limits. As night deepened, I went over my personal preparation, choosing the navy suit, rehearsing statements, reviewing gestures, and even the pacing of my steps to convey calm confidence. Every detail mattered. I fell asleep eventually, but the mind did not rest. Dreams were fragmented, visions of Simon attempting to manipulate me juxtaposed with images of his plans collapsing under scrutiny. I awoke early again, heart steady, determination unshakable. By 7 a.m., I was at the courthouse, the early light reflecting off the tall glass doors. Ava was already there, and together we entered, briefcases in hand, documents organized, every detail accounted for. The courthouse was austere, its polished marble floors and imposing columns a reminder of the gravity of what was to come. Simon arrived shortly after, flanked by his lawyer, a sharp-looking man named Dalton Rains. Simon's expression was a mask, anger restrained by effort, but I could sense the tension beneath. He tried a subtle smile in my direction, an attempt at dominance or familiarity, but I met his gaze evenly, unflinching. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, entered the courtroom, calling the session to order. She gestured for the parties to sit. Julian, seated beside Ava and me, gave a reassuring nod. The hearing began with preliminary statements. Simon's lawyer attempted to assert claims over shared property and disputed financial divisions. But the evidence we presented immediately neutralized every argument. Bank statements verified separate accounts, the trust documents confirmed inheritance protections, and Leora's journals provided a detailed record of Simon's manipulations and deceit. Simon's face betrayed his growing frustration as each claim he made was methodically dismantled by facts. He leaned toward Dalton, whispering urgently, but the words were inaudible to anyone else. The judge, maintaining control of the courtroom, allowed evidence to speak for itself. Witnesses, friends and colleagues Simon had attempted to manipulate, were called, and their testimonies were precise, unembellished, and damning. Simon's insistence on entitlement faltered in the face of objective accounts. His charm, which had so often protected him, was ineffective against the combined weight of preparation, documentation, and the calm authority I projected. Midway through the proceedings, a private investigator Leora had employed was called to testify. He provided a comprehensive account of Simon's past financial and personal schemes, corroborating Leora's journals with third-party verification. The courtroom listened, rapt as layers of Simon's deception were exposed. Simon's lawyer interjected repeatedly, attempting to suppress certain points, but the judge, clearly unimpressed by objections, allowed the information to be presented. By late afternoon, it became clear that Simon's strategy, intimidation and manipulation, had failed entirely. The judge summarized the findings, reaffirmed the terms of asset division and trust protection, and confirmed that Simon would receive only an equitable share of the jointly acquired property, with no claim on my inheritance, business, or personal accounts. As the gavel struck, a profound sense of relief washed over me. Justice had not only been served, it had been orchestrated with precision and foresight. Simon's world, built on assumption and deceit, had begun to crumble. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a new sense of autonomy. The crisp air of Savannah, the soft hum of the city, and the subtle warmth of the late afternoon sun seemed to echo the freedom I had reclaimed. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without fear, without calculation, knowing that I had orchestrated not just a legal victory, but a reclamation of dignity, autonomy, and foresight. The day after the court victory, Savannah felt different, lighter, almost surreal, as if the city itself had acknowledged the shift in my life. I woke early, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of my apartment, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel a pressing need to plan every step, every contingency. Simon's absence in my life, at least legally, was complete, but the thought of him still lurking somewhere in the background gnawed subtly at my consciousness. I dressed simply that morning in a cream blouse and tailored black trousers, opting for comfort over authority, yet my posture carried the same confidence I had honed in court. I had promised myself that today would be about reclamation and reflection. My first stop was the little florist on Whitaker Street. The bell above the door jingled pleasantly as I entered, and the scent of fresh roses and lilies enveloped me. The florist, an elderly woman named Mariette, greeted me warmly. "Nerys, back so soon? Or just feeling celebratory?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "A bit of both," I replied, choosing a bouquet of pale pink peonies and soft white lilies. "I need them for my office, a reminder that life blooms anew." Mariette chuckled, arranging the flowers with care. "Well, you deserve it, dear. Life's too short to linger on those who take more than they give." I smiled, letting her words settle. The shop felt like a sanctuary, a place where beauty was tangible and uncomplicated. Carrying the bouquet back to my apartment, I placed it on my kitchen table, sunlight highlighting the delicate petals. Their fragility and resilience mirrored my own journey in subtle ways. By mid-morning, I had calls to make. The renovation of my boutique, which had been delayed due to Simon's interference with the property title, could finally proceed without obstacles. Contractors confirmed delivery dates. Clarissa, my designer, sent updated floor plans, and the city inspectors approved permits for the expanded exhibition space. Each small confirmation reinforced the sense of regained control. I paused briefly to look out the window, noticing the city moving with its usual rhythm, unaware of the private battles and triumphs that shaped lives within it. My phone rang, displaying Julian's name. "Morning," I answered. "Nerys, congratulations again. That hearing, impeccable execution," he said warmly. I laughed lightly, appreciating the compliment. "Thanks, Julian. Your insight was invaluable." "I think we surprised them more than anyone anticipated," he chuckled. "Particularly Simon. I've never seen him so rattled. It's rare, but your preparation left no cracks for him to exploit. Well done." We discussed the next steps, filing final documentation for the property division, finalizing non-disclosure agreements, and reviewing strategies for any potential post-divorce appeals, though Julian admitted the likelihood of such challenges was minimal. The call ended with a reassurance that my legal foundation was secure. By late afternoon, I decided to walk along the riverfront, a ritual I had long since adopted to clear my mind and reflect on personal goals. The sun was low, casting long golden streaks across the water, and the soft murmur of the river lent a meditative calm. I noticed a small cafe tucked between two larger buildings and, on a whim, went inside. The barista, a young man with an easy smile, greeted me. "First time here?" he asked. "Yes," I said, settling into a corner table with my notebook. I needed a change of scenery. As I sipped a latte, I let thoughts drift to Simon. I had ensured that legally and financially, he could no longer manipulate me, but the idea of public exposure, of social reckoning, still lingered. The scandal surrounding his forgery attempts and financial deceit had already begun circulating quietly through social circles, and while I had no desire for vengeance beyond justice, I recognized the power of perception. This awareness prompted me to draft a plan for reclaiming not only my business, but also the narrative of my life. By the time I returned home, the sky had deepened into rich shades of orange and purple. I fed my cat, Ophelia, and checked messages from Clarissa regarding the boutique's layout. Each update reinforced the sense of forward momentum. That evening, a knock at the door interrupted my work. I opened it to find Leora, her coat dusted lightly with leaves, holding a bottle of wine and a small box wrapped in gold paper. "I thought you could use a quiet celebration," she said warmly. We settled onto the sofa, pouring wine into delicate glasses, and Leora handed me the gift. Inside was a vintage fountain pen, its lacquered surface gleaming, engraved with my initials. "For writing your next chapter," she said softly. The symbolism was not lost on me. We talked late into the night, recounting the events of the past weeks, laughing at Simon's predictable missteps, and discussing my plans for the boutique's expansion and new gallery collaborations. Leora reminded me that while legal victories were important, the real triumph lay in reclaiming personal agency, in creating a life that was independent, fulfilling, and authentic. The conversation drifted to travel. Leora suggested a short trip to Charleston, a change of scenery to celebrate my newfound freedom. I considered it seriously, realizing that the thought of leaving Savannah temporarily for leisure felt luxurious and completely mine to decide. The next morning, I woke with renewed determination. The boutique renovations were progressing faster than anticipated, and I wanted to oversee the installation of the exhibition lighting personally. Arriving at the shop, I was greeted by the crew with cheerful efficiency. Clarissa had selected a muted palette of deep blues and earthy tones, giving the space a modern yet intimate feel. I moved among the contractors, providing guidance on placements, double-checking measurements, and ensuring that each detail aligned with my vision. By early afternoon, the walls were prepared for hanging artwork, the lighting perfectly calibrated, and the new wine displays installed with precision. The sense of accomplishment was tangible, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to step back and appreciate the transformation. As I walked toward the office area, my phone buzzed with a message from Ava. "Simon is attempting to contact mutual acquaintances, likely trying to gauge your reaction to the public fallout. Do not engage. Maintain distance and discretion." I read the message carefully. Feeling a mix of amusement and resolve, his attempts were irrelevant. The legal and social boundaries I had established were immovable. That evening, while reviewing inventory, I heard the familiar chime of the door. Expecting Clarissa, I turned to see Marcus, the architect who had assisted in the boutique expansion, standing with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I thought you might like these," he said, offering them with a shy smile. I accepted, touched by the gesture, and we moved to the small seating area to discuss the finishing touches for the grand opening. Marcus proved insightful and encouraging, his suggestions for display arrangements and customer flow demonstrating a genuine understanding of both design and business strategy. Conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in months, I felt a simple pleasure in shared enthusiasm and creative planning. As night fell, I left the boutique with a sense of satisfaction and anticipation. Savannah's streets glimmered under the lamplight, and the crisp air carried the faint scent of the river and fallen leaves. Walking home, I reflected on the profound shift in my life. From fear and uncertainty to clarity, autonomy and opportunity. The legal victory was only a foundation. The real work lay in building a future that was authentically mine, grounded in integrity, vision, and resilience. At home, I placed the fountain pen Leora had given me on the desk, opened a fresh notebook, and began jotting down ideas for the boutique's launch, gallery collaborations, and even a potential Charleston trip. Each word reaffirmed my commitment to agency, independence, and creativity. For the first time, I truly understood that revenge was not about destruction, but about reclaiming life on one's own terms. Simon's downfall was a consequence of his own choices, and the universe, it seemed, had a way of balancing reckoning and justice. As I closed the notebook that night, the city quiet around me, I felt an unwavering sense of purpose. The journey ahead was promising, and I was ready to embrace it fully, free from manipulation, deceit, or fear. The morning of the boutique's grand opening arrived with a crisp clarity that mirrored my mood. I woke early, sunlight streaming across the cream-colored walls of my apartment, and felt a strange combination of nerves and exhilaration. The boutique, now fully renovated and expanded, had become more than a store. It was a tangible symbol of my independence, a testament to years of perseverance, and a statement to the world that I would no longer be anyone's shadow. As I dressed in a sleek teal dress with understated gold jewelry, I allowed myself a moment to glance in the mirror. The reflection that met me was confident, composed, and aware of the power in self-possession. Marcus had arrived early to oversee the final arrangements, and I found him adjusting the lighting in the main exhibition space when I entered. "Everything looks spectacular," I said, smiling at the subtle brilliance of his work. He returned the smile, his eyes lingering on mine just long enough to communicate a quiet admiration. "You've brought this place to life, Naris. It's more than just a boutique, it's an experience." We moved among the staff, ensuring each wine display, art placement, and decorative element was exactly as planned. Clarissa arrived shortly after, carrying additional accessories for the wine tasting area. Her usual effervescence filled the space, and together, the three of us performed a final walkthrough, touching each corner, each table, as if affirming the culmination of months of labor, vision, and strategy. Invitations had been sent to longtime clients, local business owners, and a few journalists, and by mid-morning, the first guests began arriving. The energy in the boutique was electric. Soft music played on the sound system. The aroma of fine wines and fresh flowers mingled in the air, and the walls proudly displayed works by local artists, each piece bathed in the perfect light. The first guest to arrive was Leora, who greeted me with an enthusiastic hug and a small notebook filled with notes for future collaborations. "You've outdone yourself, Neris," she said sincerely, eyes bright. "This is beyond what I imagined." I smiled, feeling the warmth of friendship and support envelop me. Soon after, regular customers trickled in, expressing delight at the new layout and collection. They complimented the careful curation, the blend of wines and art, and the inviting atmosphere that encouraged exploration and conversation. Each comment reinforced my belief that this venture was not just a business, but a vibrant cultural hub, a place where creativity and commerce coexisted harmoniously. By early afternoon, the media arrived, cameras clicking as journalists documented the opening, capturing images of the walls adorned with art and the meticulously arranged wine displays. I gave a brief interview emphasizing the boutique's mission to support local artists while providing a curated wine experience, carefully maintaining a tone of professional enthusiasm without revealing too much of my personal triumph over the recent past. Throughout the day, Marcus stayed close, offering subtle assistance and genuine encouragement. We shared small moments of conversation that were neither forced nor superficial, discussions of architecture, favorite wines, and the artists whose work adorned the walls. Each exchange strengthened a quiet bond, and for the first time in months, I felt comfortable in the presence of someone whose intentions seemed sincere, untangled from the webs of deception that had so long defined my relationships. Midway through the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Julian. Simon attempted to inquire about the grand opening. Disregard. Any engagement will only validate his curiosity. I read the text, feeling a mixture of amusement and lingering irritation. His persistence was futile. The legal and social safeguards I had implemented rendered any attempt at manipulation impotent. The thought of him pacing somewhere in his new, modest apartment, imagining ways to reclaim access to what he had lost, struck me as a reminder that my independence had been hard-earned, but irrevocable. As the day continued, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance. I froze momentarily, recognizing the disheveled form of Simon. His once confident stride had been replaced by a hesitant, almost furtive movement. He paused, scanning the room, his eyes briefly locking with mine. In that instant, I felt no fear, no desire for confrontation, only a calm awareness that the scales of justice, both legal and social, had been balanced. He did not approach. Perhaps the realization of his own defeat had tempered him, or perhaps the presence of witnesses, clients, and journalists discouraged any further audacity. I allowed myself a small, private smile and turned my attention back to the guests, who had begun sampling wines and discussing the artworks with animated interest. Later, Julian arrived to ensure all post-opening documentation and contracts were in order. We discussed upcoming collaborations with local artists, wine tasting events, and marketing strategies for the next quarter. His approval and guidance provided a layer of reassurance, reinforcing the sense that the boutique was on a trajectory not only of creative success, but of financial sustainability. By early evening, the crowd had thinned, leaving only a handful of dedicated customers and friends. I took a moment to walk the space alone, observing the interplay of light, shadow, and color, feeling a profound satisfaction in the seamless integration of vision and reality. Marcus approached, carrying a tray of wine glasses, and together we toasted quietly, acknowledging the culmination of effort and the promise of the future. "To independence, creativity, and new beginnings," he said softly. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass gently against his. The gesture was simple, but its resonance was powerful, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey, the struggles, and the triumphs that had brought us to this moment. After the toast, we moved to the small seating area, where I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The boutique, the legal battles, and the personal growth of the past months had all converged into a single, tangible reality. Simon's presence, once a source of fear and manipulation, had been neutralized. The power he sought to exert over my life had been legally and socially dismantled. In its place, a new power emerged, the authority of self-determination, grounded in clarity, foresight, and integrity. That night, as the final guests departed and the boutique settled into a quiet, almost reverent stillness, I walked home beneath the softly glowing streetlights. The city was calm, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, and I felt an uncharacteristic serenity. Unbroken by doubt or resentment, I reflected on the trajectory of the past year, the betrayal, the legal battles, the painstaking effort to reclaim my life, and realized that each challenge had fortified me, preparing me for this moment of authentic ownership over my destiny. At home, I poured a final glass of wine, allowing its warmth and flavor to remind me of the rewards that diligence and resilience could yield. I opened my notebook once more, jotting ideas for future events, gallery collaborations, and expansions, each word reinforcing the narrative I was actively constructing, one of independence, creativity, and strategic foresight. As I closed the notebook, I realized that Simon's attempts to undermine me had failed not through luck, but through meticulous planning, unwavering focus, and a refusal to be manipulated. The weight of past fear had transformed into a foundation for empowerment, and the world, for the first time in a long while, seemed open with possibilities rather than fraught with obstacles. Later that night, I called Leora to recount the events of the day, her excitement matching my own. "You've turned what could have been just a celebration into a statement," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "And it's only the beginning." I agreed, feeling the truth in her words. Tomorrow, the boutique would continue its journey, but tonight I allowed myself a rare moment of complete satisfaction. The grand opening was not only a success in business terms, it symbolized the reclamation of my autonomy, a quiet triumph over deceit, and a reaffirmation of the values and vision that would guide me forward. In the solitude of my apartment, I finally allowed myself to release the tension of the past months. The city outside was alive, yet I felt cocooned in a space of achievement and calm, aware that the journey ahead, while full of challenges, was now navigable on my own terms. Simon's shadow had receded, and the light of possibility illuminated the path ahead. The days following the boutique's grand opening were marked by a steady rhythm of work, creativity, and small victories. Neris awoke each morning with a clarity she had never known before. Her independence was no longer theoretical. It was a living, breathing reality shaped by contracts, shipments, and the steady hum of daily operations. The expanded space became a hub for community engagement. Local artists scheduled workshops, wine-tasting evenings grew more popular with each week, and regular clients became friends who offered advice, introductions, and encouragement. Marcus continued to play a key role, not only in design but in conceptual planning, often arriving early to ensure everything ran smoothly. Over time, their collaboration deepened into an easy companionship, unburdened by the complications that had defined her marriage. One afternoon, a notification from Julian reminded her of a pending legal update regarding Simon's attempts to challenge aspects of the divorce settlement. She opened the secure message with practiced composure, reviewing the attached documents. Simon had submitted a new motion claiming discrepancies in the distribution of assets, but Julian's annotations clarified that the claims were baseless, and procedural safeguards had already nullified any potential leverage. Neris allowed herself a small smile, appreciating the irony. His attempts to exert influence had been meticulously contained, leaving him frustrated and powerless. That evening, as she closed the boutique, she noticed a familiar face across the street. Simon, looking disheveled and anxious, lingered outside the building. Their eyes met briefly. He seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether to approach, and then retreated without a word. Neris felt no desire to pursue the interaction. There was no need. The legal victory, combined with her newfound confidence, had neutralized the threat he once posed. Inside, she poured herself a glass of red wine and moved to the small reading nook she had set up in the corner of the boutique. It was quiet, the soft hum of the city outside providing a calm backdrop. She allowed herself to reflect on the transformation of the past year, the betrayal, the legal battles, and the painstaking rebuilding of both her personal life and professional identity. The trust her father had established, combined with her careful planning, had not only preserved her inheritance, but allowed her to leverage it into a sustainable, flourishing business. Her father's foresight, once abstract, had become a tangible foundation upon which she now stood. A week later, Marcus suggested they host a small VIP evening to celebrate the boutique's continued success and preview a new series of art installations. Neris agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to solidify relationships with both patrons and artists. The event was intimate but lively, the atmosphere infused with enthusiasm and mutual appreciation. Guests moved between tasting areas and galleries, commenting on the innovative integration of space and experience. Neris observed quietly, content to let her work speak for itself, the pleasure of accomplishment filling her more than any conversation could. Near the end of the evening, Marcus approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "May I?" he asked, offering one to her. She accepted, and they stepped out onto the small patio behind the boutique. The Tucson skyline glittered under the evening stars, the city alive yet distant, allowing a moment of private reflection. "You've built something extraordinary," Marcus said softly, "and you've done it entirely on your terms." Neris nodded, savoring the champagne. "It hasn't been easy, but it's worth every moment of struggle." They spoke then of future plans, collaborations with other local artists, expanding tasting events, even small lecture series to educate and inspire visitors. Each idea was met with enthusiasm and meticulous discussion, reinforcing the sense that this partnership, grounded in respect and shared vision, had the potential to grow into something enduring. A notification interrupted the moment, an encrypted message from Julian. "Simon has withdrawn all pending motions. No further action required on your part. Case closed." Relief surged through her, not because she relished his defeat, but because the final barrier to her freedom had been formally removed. She set the phone aside, savoring the clarity and the absence of lingering threats. That night, she allowed herself a rare moment of complete relaxation. She prepared a simple meal, played soft jazz in the background, and moved through her apartment with a sense of ownership and calm. The walls, once mere surfaces, now held memories of struggle, triumph, and growth. The boutique's success mirrored her own, each new shipment and carefully curated display reflecting her dedication, taste, and resilience. Days turned into weeks, and the boutique's reputation grew steadily. Local magazines highlighted the innovative combination of wine and art. Artists expressed gratitude for the exposure, and clients returned with friends, eager to share the experience. Each visit, each compliment, reinforced the sense that she had created not only a business, but a space that fostered connection, creativity, and community. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Neris received a call from Leora. "Have you seen the latest news?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. Neris raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Leora laughed softly. "Simon, there's a small piece in the art section about his attempt to start a design business in Las Vegas. He's struggling. His ventures are failing. It seems his reputation followed him there, too." Neris allowed herself a small private smile. The world had corrected itself in subtle but undeniable ways. She had not gloated, had not sought revenge. Her actions had been deliberate, measured, ensuring protection and autonomy. And yet, the consequences of Simon's own choices had become evident without her interference. Later that week, Marcus and Neris collaborated on a new series of interior layouts for the boutique, experimenting with space and display in ways that enhanced both aesthetic appeal and functional flow. Their partnership, grounded in shared vision rather than obligation, became a source of quiet inspiration. Through their work, Neris realized that life after betrayal could be richer, more nuanced, and more fulfilling than any life lived in compromise or fear. One afternoon, as she rearranged a display of rare wines, Sarah approached with a smile. "You know, Miss Caldwell, I've never seen someone bounce back from such adversity with this level of grace. It's inspiring." Neris chuckled softly. "Grace isn't automatic. It's learned through perseverance, planning, and refusing to let others define your worth." They shared a brief laugh, and Neris felt a warmth she had long missed, the simple satisfaction of mentorship, of passing forward knowledge gained through hard experience. The months continued with a rhythm that balanced challenge and achievement. Seasonal events brought new customers, collaborations introduced her to emerging artists, and the boutique thrived financially and culturally. Neris observed each development with a measured joy, aware that each success was both a reward and a reaffirmation of the path she had chosen. By the first anniversary of the boutique's reopening, the space had transformed into a cornerstone of the local community, a hub of art, wine, and conversation. Friends and clients celebrated with a small gathering, each acknowledging the journey that had brought Neris to this point. Marcus stood beside her, their partnership solid and unspoken in its understanding. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Neris stepped onto the patio alone, gazing at the stars. The past year had been defined by upheaval, betrayal, and struggle, yet it had ended with clarity, empowerment, and a profound sense of freedom. Simon's attempts to manipulate, control, or reclaim what he believed was his had been thwarted through strategic planning, legal safeguards, and the unwavering pursuit of self-determination. Neris inhaled the cool night air, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. The city below, the stars above, the quiet bustle of the boutique, all were testaments to her resilience, vision, and strength. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly unburdened. The journey ahead promised challenges, but Neris was ready. Her independence, hard-won and absolute, would guide her through whatever came next. Life, she realized, was no longer about survival or compromise. It was about growth, creation, and the fulfillment of her own vision. The boutique was thriving, her relationships grounded in authenticity, and her father's legacy preserved. In this new chapter, Neris understood the true power of foresight, resilience, and measured action. And for the first time, she embraced the future with excitement rather than apprehension. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Strength is knowing who you are, even when the world seeks to define you otherwise." Neris smiled, letting the night absorb her quiet triumph. The road ahead was hers to navigate, guided by experience, courage, and the certainty that she could overcome any obstacle without compromising her integrity. She poured a glass of wine, raising it to the stars. "To freedom, truth, and the life we choose," she whispered. And for the first time in years, the toast felt entirely hers. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.